Aloha. Today I wanted to speak on pretty much just like a message to the parents of indigo babies, specifically like children of the 80s. So I'm speaking specifically from, obviously, from my perspective of interacting. So this is not only a message to my parents, but a message to everybody, anybody. It doesn't really matter because it pertains to everybody in regards to. So today being Dia de los Muertos, where we connect with our ancestors. You can connect with your ancestors a lot easier on this day. The circuits are open, everything is more active. As soon as I walked outside, 2 ravens flew right on top of number 11. And it's just really, the main point was really to, before we can understand our future, before we can even understand the now, you have to understand first the past and the depths of the past, not just like your past or a past, but literally the depth that you go into your past and understanding what was will be equivalent to how much you can understand the depths of the now and of your creative future. Like, it affects how much you can create in your future. So if you only go back a shallow distance into your past, into, like, for example, history was fabricated. History is all the history in the university systems, all the history in the public education system, all the history that is out here right now being told to the public of basically it's just child programming. Anything that has been pumped into that system to create like a docile sort of American dream / American slavery state of mind, everything that has been created in that space is for a benefit, not of your benefit, not of anybody's benefit. Most people already know this, but even like the good stuff, even the cool stuff that we see or that we interact with, or that even the stuff that we consider to be who we are and what we believe, and like all these things that we call ourselves believing in and understanding and downloading as a projection of who we are or part of, all of this is heavily laced. It's basically like drugs. So it's like an addictive, it's like heroin. So like the mainstream is like heroin. It's like it gets into your system and then it just hooks you, and you're hooked. You're hooked so far that you start creating your reality based upon your addiction and your drug. And the drug is everything that you see around you that adds up to, homeless people on the streets, poverty, war, ongoing war, non-stop war, drug problems. The fact that they send their soldiers to war and then the soldiers come back and from war or just get out of the military after spending like 5, 7, 8, 10, 12 years. There's nothing for them. There's nothing for us. Like, it's it's a setup. So like when G.I. Joe came out in the 80s, for me that was just like a main thing. I'm waking up in the morning and I'm sharing this now so you can see the correlations between then and now, and how then in like 87, 88, 89, when I was waking up getting ready to go to school, um, in the morning, cartoons is on, gotta make your lunch, gotta get everything ready to go. You're basically a little adult going to getting ready to go to school, which is your job, and that's what it's prepping you for. And when you get there, you learn what is told to you by people who told them to tell you what to say in order to keep you in a state of mind that makes you susceptible to like a Greco-Roman education system that is void of all indigenous information, all incriminating information for the people in charge, so-called in charge. So like the White House and the politicians that have been selling stories for years, and behind that, that's just like the cream, that's just like the chocolate syrup on top of the whipped cream top on top of the pie of the cancerous pie. So like we've been eating a cancerous pie for, I'll start right now with the history as long as Christopher Columbus came here. So like smallpox blankets and massacres and genocides and everything else that has led up to the not looking at the rest of the world and our own history here on our immediate surroundings, on indigenous people's land. Nobody wants to look at that stuff. So we, the parents, install this stuff into our children by not acting. So you're not acting, not changing. You're not changing because you're comfortable. And that's what the old school generation is based on. It's based on just getting by. Just making sure things are good enough. And good enough is not good enough. Good enough has never been good enough, because good enough is somebody else's good enough. Because that somebody else who's saying, oh, you got it good enough, is not only living fat, but they are completely destroying the psychology of the human mind. And it's starting to create a thicker, or not starting to, it's always been creating a thick shell around the heart that people have to fight through and get through. So the message to the parents of the indigo babies is that, from the indigo baby who had to fight through, I had to fight through all of this from the 80s growing up. So I was born in 82. So I was born in Berkeley, but lived in Oakland, and started out in East Oakland, and then went to school in East Oakland, moved out for a few years, came back to West Oakland, and went to high school in West Oakland. And the 80s in East Oakland, that shit is... Okay, so what happened is that there's a level of separation that needs to be, there's a gap that needs to be created between the individual and their heart, the individual and their parents, the individual and their surroundings, the individual and their friends and family. There's gaps being spread throughout all of these relationships, and when those gaps get spread, our natural condition is to be bonded with each other. So so-called controllers know this. This is like basic psychology. So those gaps get filled with stuff like ESPN, toys, cartoons, movies, the education system, Jeopardy. Um, these are heavy duty ones, like the mainstream one. As I mentioned Jeopardy because Jeopardy, it was for the parents and the kids too. So, but mainly for the parents to feel smart or feel like they're smarter than their children, but have this illusion of intelligence based upon um, information that's being shared in an intellectual fashion. But really, because I just watched Jeopardy recently and saw how deep those programs go into telling you how your reality is faced, like how your reality is created and how it looks and what's important and what's information and what is history and what is all of this stuff that creates this idea of our reality. But it's all cream. It's all like touching the cream. It's still the chocolate syrup on top of the whipped cream. And they're not really talking about anything other than that, ever. If you go any further than that, the whole infrastructure of this system will implode on itself, and which is what's happening right now. The only thing is happening slow is because people cannot let go of what is so like downloaded into the reality, conditioned into the state of mind, conditioned into our relationships. So we believe that we have close relationships with our friends and family. When you really look into it, you have to see, in order to see how close you are, how thick things are, you have to see how, like the past, you have to, just like in order to understand the moment and the future, you have to understand the depths of the past. So in order to understand relationships and connections, you don't only have to understand the individual right now, or the individual, like how their now interacts with how they create their future, but also where they came from, who these people are. So that adds up to who they are now, and then that adds up to your relationship with that individual. So I guess the message would be just to don't be afraid to go into the depths of the past, and be humble in understanding that this reality is not on your shoulders. Like, you didn't create this space. So the babies that came up in the 80s had to go through physically being separated from their elders and their parents, from things like drugs and work and TV, food, like all this vanity, just like basic garbage that is a plague. It's a plague. It's a different version of a plague, like a psychological plague. And in the 90s, it was a transition over from that to a celebration of the vanity and the artificialism and all of the garbage food, like all with the plastic reality. So it went from like rocks and dirt to like plastic and electronics in the 90s. And I had a perspective on it from coming up in the 80s and then still being young in the 90s. So I have an observation of it that can see that this is now a younger brother and sister that was in the heart of this. And there's a lot of healing that needs to be completed before we can start doing all like the New Age community. This is why the New Age community hits walls and barriers, because the New Age community is not going into the depths of the past. That's the main thing. And it's the same thing with the family environment. Everybody wants to focus on like the stars and the future and this and all that, because they don't want to look in the past and see and be vulnerable. That's the main thing. With the parents. They can't really be vulnerable because you've been trained to be strong and like, oh, take care of business. And there's a difference between being old and being an elder, and a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And there's like these whole interactions between all of those have been manipulated to be to fight themselves or be hidden away from the actual the conscious mind. So it's completely out of the the relationship between people. But the other side of this is the manipulation of the subconscious through our everyday reality and our moments. So I would just say don't drug your babies. Don't, because the babies coming out today are even more amped up and tuned in. Any kind of stuff that's handed down from the old school is going to do even more damage. So I'll leave it there. Look into yourself, look, be more vulnerable, open up, and go into the past, reconnect with your ancestors, and see what's up with today and tomorrow. So leave it there. Until next time, peace, love, and harmony.